This sweater that I'm wearing looks absolutely insane on my playback here. I don't know if that's gonna come out in the video, but if so, enjoy, I guess. Hello everybody, how's it going? I'm Davis Morgan. Today we're gonna talk about another disturbing book that I read when I was little and that traumatized me for life, so let's get into it. So children's media and disturbing media, two genres that should have absolutely no overlap, but oddly do sometimes. You have movies like Coraline that are made for kids, but it's also just incredibly unnerving. Or what about Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark? That book scarred me as a child when I first read in the 3rd grade. I know it also scarred a lot of people. So today we're going to talk about another disturbing book that scarred me when I discovered it in the 3rd grade. I don't know what it was with my 3rd grade teacher, Miss Parmenter. She was awesome, but she did have a lot of disturbing books. This one was called The Curse of the Campfire Weenies by David Lubar. It was a collection of short stories that seemed like nice and inviting on the front, like, oh, it's a funny book about weenies. But the stories range from like kind of funny and silly to existentially terrifying. For instance, the very first story in the book is called Mr. Hoo-ha, which is a name that has honestly aged pretty poorly. If you know, then you know. It's all about a punk kid who isn't scared of anything except clowns. Now, I can sympathize with that. I was also scared of clowns as a child and maybe just a little bit as an adult as well. But anyways, the mom hires a clown named Mr. Hoo-ha to entertain the kid's younger brother at his birthday party. Our main character is scared of the clown, but he decides that he's going to sneak over to his van and see him like remove all of his makeup so he can finally understand that clowns are just regular people under all of their gear and their makeup and their wigs and all that stuff. When Mr. Hoo-ha finishes up, he goes back to his van and starts to remove his makeup, and this is what our main character sees. I let out a gasp as his real nose unrolled. It was thin and long, like a tiny flattened elephant's trunk that dangled just past his chin. He stripped off his wig, revealing a brain covered by a transparent membrane webbed with tiny veins. Then he reached towards his mouth. As he peeled off the huge lips, I realized they weren't painted on. They were plastic. They'd concealed a gumless cluster of long brown teeth that jutted from his jaw like stalactites. He pulled off the gloves. His fingers seemed boneless, like bloated worms. As he leaned over to remove his shoes, I was thankful I couldn't see what was really at the end of his legs. So yeah, pretty terrifying, a really creepy image. This story absolutely scarred me as a child. I don't know how I got along, like reading something this existentially freaky and then running off to play tetherball at recess. That's like some serious compartmentalization skills that I wish I still had now. Body horror has honestly always creeped me out. It still does to this day. I think I just have an overactive imagination, and picturing what it would be like to live like Mr. Hoo-ha in that horrifying body just gives me the creeps. The story is awesome though, and while the book did scar me, I absolutely love it. I think body horror is just really cool because again, like, the horror for me doesn't come from like, look at that disgusting thing. It's more like, what would it be like to live as that thing in that painful existence? So that's why that story always creeped me out. One of my favorite stories in the book is called Spin. It's about a little kid named Jimmy who has the unique psychic ability to make things spin. He can like make them twirl around in place. His older brother hates this though, and he's mad when his mom forces him to take Jimmy to the park. The brother and his friend Ray just ignore Jimmy and they go off to shoot baskets at the park, but Jimmy is making some of the trash in the park like spin around, and they get really bothered by it for some reason. Again, they just feel like they're really annoyed that he can make stuff spin. Maybe there's like jealousy, I don't know. But they end up picking him up and they place him high up on the play fort so that he can't get himself down and he can't spin anything. They like leave him stuck up there because he's so little. As the brother and Ray start to walk away, Jimmy notices a small grain of sand in his hand and he starts to make it spin. The only issue is that the park itself is covered in sand, and he isn't making the single grain of sand spin, he's making every single grain of sand spin individually. The sand stuck to Jimmy's shoes starts to grind the rubber away from his soles, but it quickly eats through everything that it can, and Jimmy ends up being safe on top of the playground. His brother and Ray are less fortunate, however. The sand begins to spin and literally grinds Ray and Jimmy's brother like completely away, like they're sanded down into nothingness. Jimmy says he can hear them screaming for a moment, but then it stops. They were literally shredded to pieces by tiny individual grains of sand. I tend to be pretty empathetic when it comes to pain. That's what makes like a lot of movies with torture scenes in them very hard to watch for me, even though I still like watching them. But just imagining myself being shredded to death or like grinded down to death is horrifying. It's also just a really cool and unique way to use telekinesis in a children's story. Again, I think these stories got to me so much because I did have such an overactive imagination. So like imagining this in my head, I have such a like distinct image of it, and that's what makes it so scary. Some stories are less explicit in their violence and play on the paranoia of our characters, who are always kids. In The Unforgiving Tree, our main character starts to notice that a tree is moving closer and closer to his house every day. It eventually gets so close that one of the branches crashes through his bedroom window at night. We then learn that the kid once tried to cut the tree down years ago when he was really little. He stole his father's saw and he almost cut it down, but it stopped. The kid goes to apologize to the tree, but one of its branches snaps off and nearly crushes him to death. So it's like this tree is literally angry at him for trying to cut it down years ago. It's holding this grudge. Later that night, a branch shoots through the window and attempts to actually physically strangle the kid, but he cuts the branch with a pocket knife, and it says it leaks like a sap like blood. And then the parents end up cutting that tree down the next day since the roots are like messing with the plumbing underneath the house. The very end of our story has our main kid being reminded by his dad that when he was little, he carved his initials into every tree in the neighborhood, and then the kid remarks that he can see the trees getting closer and closer to the house. It seems like they're moving closer and closer every day. I love this story because it's almost like a little cosmic horror. Like the kid did something years ago when he probably didn't know right from wrong, and now nature itself is trying to come and like kill him for it. I think it's a cool, just interesting story because it makes you wonder like, what is the deal with these trees? Is all nature like that? Something that's really great about these books is I think it does teach kind of good lessons to kids where it's like, hey, maybe don't go around carving your names in trees, or respect the world around you, or else you'll be strangled by a tree at night, which obviously shouldn't happen, but I live in a very windy area of the country, and I swear sometimes these branches are gonna fall through my house and kill me and my wife at night, so that's very fun. But anyways, speaking of cosmic horror, Bobbing for Dummies is about a group of obnoxious bullies at a YMCA Halloween party, and they're being rude just to everybody there. They harass a kid dressed as a turkey, and each of them pulled his legs, and the kid starts crying. They really are just the absolute worst group of bullies. They bob for apples and are generally just really nasty to everybody. They say like bobbing for apples sucks, and it's boring. They're just like the absolute worst kids. They end up sneaking off to the pool only for the roof of the building to be ripped off, and then two giant kids appear above them, look down to the pool, and then bob down, eating our two bullies alive. One thing that I love about these stories is that nothing is ever explained. There is no lore behind them. They don't follow any sort of continuity. They're just creepy things that are happening to kids who almost always kind of deserve what is coming to them. Like seriously, almost always the main character in these stories are like insufferable, whiny kids. So it kind of feels a little bit good to see them get some insanely disproportionate justice. Another story that gives me the heebie-jeebies is called Eat a Bug. Our main character, Laura, is at recess and is lamenting the fact that she doesn't have any friends. She thinks her life couldn't be worse, but then she takes comfort in the fact that at least she isn't Debbie Dirt Digger, who is a girl who just digs in the dirt all recess. Really creative name, Laura. Nice insult. Laura goes over and starts to harass Debbie for having no friends. Debbie then points out that Laura also doesn't have any friends, so she can't really talk, and then she says she'll be Laura's friend if Laura eats a bug. Laura is like so sad and lonely about this that she swallows the bug in one bite in order to be friends with somebody. And then this happens. "Did you chew?" Debbie asked. Laura shook her head and then said, "No, that would have been too awful." She wiped her hand on her shirt. Debbie, her eyes still holding Laura, nodded. "Good. If you do that, they can't lay their eggs." "What?" "Nothing," Debbie said. "Don't think about it. You'll have friends soon. Lots of friends. And so will I. So will everyone. Bugs are so much nicer than people. They treat everyone the same." She looked away. As Laura lost Debbie's gaze, the world seemed to fade for an instant. When it returned, Laura was standing across the playground, watching the girl dig in the dirt. Laura frowned and brushed a small speck of dirt off her fingertip. For a moment, she thought she'd just eaten a bug, but that couldn't be. No, she'd never do something like that. Her stomach fluttered at the very idea. Her stomach fluttered and wriggled. Across the playground, Debbie hummed as she digged in the dirt. What just an uncomfortable end to a story. Laura wasn't even really that bad in the scheme of things. She was a little bit rude, but I don't think she deserved having bugs literally infest her body. And it also implies that Debbie is trying to implant bugs into every kid in the playground. Like I said, there's no real lore to these stories, but just thinking about like the ideas that it makes you picture in your head are really cool. Like, is Debbie a weird bug person? Is she trying to get people infested with bugs? Why couldn't Laura really remember it? Was she just blocking that out of her head, or was there something else going on? Just a really inventive way to write stories for kids that gets them thinking about what could possibly be going on. I remember trying to write my own little scary stories when I was in like 3rd and 4th grade based off of these books. I'm sure they weren't very good, but it's just a cool way to get kids interested in horror. These stories don't hit quite as hard now that I'm an adult, but they were really effective when I was a kid. I think it helps that all the stories are from a kid's point of view. The author author, David Lubar, is really great at writing kids. He makes them like a little cartoonish in how terrible they can be, but they always feel somewhat believable. It's like really impressive that he can write from that point of view so well. I also like to imagine that he was made fun of a lot when he was younger, and now he's using these books to take some sort of weird revenge on all the kids that harassed him, like some sort of weird literary justice that only he truly understands. But David Lubar, if you're watching this, I don't claim to know anything about your life, but that's what I would have done. Some of these stories aren't even scary, just a little funny. There's this really great short one called Miss Barunky that stuck with me for a while, and it goes like this. I hate Miss Barunky. She's the worst teacher in the school. I can't believe I got stuck with her for 2nd grade. When I found out, I almost ran away from home. The worst part is that I came so close to not getting her. If I was 1 year younger, I'd have been safe. She's retiring at the end of this year. That's just about all she talks about. That and her stupid math facts. She makes us memorize stuff every single day. I'm sick of it. She makes us learn a lot more math than we'll ever need. But we get her back. All the kids hate her. We play tricks on her whenever we can. It's a war, us against her. She teaches us math facts. We hide all our pencils. She teaches us math facts. We make faces when she turns away. She used to shout a lot. That's what I heard from some of the older kids. This year, she hasn't shouted at all, but I still hate her, and she hates us. I know she does. Mom says that hate is a bad word, but Mom doesn't have to sit here every day. At least the year is almost over. I made it through Miss Barunky's class in one piece. I survived. Well, boys and girls, Miss Barunky said when there was only a minute left on the very last day, I can't say I'll miss you, and I know you won't miss me, but I'll tell you one thing. She stopped and grinned at the class, taking time to stare at each and every one of us. When her eyes reached mine, I felt like I was trapped on the wrong side of a cage at the zoo. I waited to see what she would say. I'm going away, far away, but you'll never forget me. I can promise you that. I'll be part of your life forever. I've made sure of that. Then she starts laughing. The bell rang. It was over. I was through with Miss Barunky and her meanness and her math facts. She couldn't do anything more to me. And she was wrong. No matter what she said, I knew I wouldn't ever think of her again. As sure as the sky is blue, as sure as water is wet, as sure as 2 times 2 is 7, Miss Barunky was out of my life for good. So just the idea of a teacher spitefully teaching her students the wrong stuff when it comes to math is just really funny to me. All these stories are really unique and clever and inventive, and it also just taps into this genre of children's horror that I feel is sadly dying out. I didn't grow up on Goosebumps, but I grew up on these stories, and I grew up on scary stories to tell in the dark. And I think that's a big reason why I love horror to this day. I've talked about this topic at length, but I do think that children's horror is incredibly important. I think it's a genre that is like sorely missing today, and I need to do my part and start writing children's horror stories. I think it's just good to learn how to be scared. And like I said, I'm so glad that I learned how to be scared when I was younger. I think kids today need to be able to do the same. So if you have kids, consider introducing them to some of these books. There's a whole series about there's like the Curse of the Campfire weenies, Invasion of the Road weenies, and that kind of stuff. Introduce them to Goosebumps, or like have them watch Are You Afraid of the Dark, that kind of stuff. I just think it's really important. If you remember these books, then please let me know. I swear my family is the only one on the planet that grew up reading these, but let me know if you did and if they messed you up as well. I might cover more of these if these videos do well, and just thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't. I'm getting really close to like 1,000 subs. I guess decently close. I'm trying to hit it before my birthday in April, and I'll be back with more videos soon, so see ya.